All right, gang, today we're going to talk real briefly about history of the Middle East in the 20th century. And we're going to end up stopping right after the creation of the nation-state of Israel, or rather the reasoning behind it. And we're going to watch a short video in class about it. So those of you guys that aren't here in class, you're not going to get the video, but you've got the textbooks or access to the textbooks. Most of you do, so you can read that section and find it in the text. Okay. So first of all, to understand what goes on in the Middle East, you have to understand that the Ottoman Empire had controlled the Middle East for centuries. And at its greatest, the Ottoman Empire stretched all the way essentially to North Africa and almost into Europe around to Spain. But even as it declined, it still controlled a lot of the area in what we call the Middle East today. Okay, so the Ottoman Empire controlled most of that area that we know as the Middle East. Think about Iraq, Kuwait. Now, they did not control Iran. They did not control what becomes Saudi Arabia later. Okay, they did control a portion of it at the time, but they didn't control most of it. But they did control Syria, Palestine, or Israel. They did control Egypt for the most part, although Egypt by this point was independent and their own nation. And Jordan, they controlled those areas. Okay. Well, what the Ottomans did, just like every other imperialistic power, is through the 1800s, they had repressed several nationalist uprisings. They put down every nationalist uprising. And so the people in the Middle East, the Iraqis, the Kuwaitis, the Jordanians, and Syrians were fairly frustrated with this because they wanted to rule and they wanted to be able to govern themselves. Well, after World War I, they felt they were going to get that right. They thought they were going to be able to have that independence because the League of Nations had said, hey, everyone should have the right to govern themselves. But unfortunately, they were proven wrong because just like many of the other failures, the Ottoman Empire, the Allies, took the spoils of war. The Allies, instead of giving the people in the Middle East their say in government, they said, no, we're going to give you guys over to big brothers to look over and kind of take care of you until you're strong enough to govern yourselves on your own. And that is when the League of Nations created the mandate system. The mandate system was essentially a new version of colonialism where the Allies were given control of certain parts of land, and this land, rather, was able to govern themselves under the guidance and under the leadership of two European countries. Okay, the first of all was Britain. Britain was given control of the larger section of the Middle East, and that would be Iraq, what becomes Iraq, Jordan, or what becomes Jordan, and Palestine were given to them. Now, Palestine, it's important to note, was an independent, or rather, its own nation. It was not Israel. It was this little sliver of land and was controlled by Muslims. The French, on the other hand, or along with them, rather, were given this large section of Syria. Okay, this is a large section of land of what is known today as Syria, and then you've got the Lebanese, or the country of Lebanon here. All right, and so those are the areas that were given over to control to both the British and the French, and so that was all well and good if you're British or French, but there's several main problems with this, and a couple of those are this. Number one, you have Christians yet again controlling Muslims. At least under the Ottoman Empire, the Turks are Muslims as well, and they are also, so they're going to govern their nations accordingly. Well, the Muslims that were here in the Middle East felt that it was too similar to the Crusades in the Middle Ages, and felt like it was simply just another version of people that didn't understand their religion telling them how to run their countries. Secondly, there was a movement in the late 1900s called Zionism. Zionism was the idea that a Jewish homeland, a new Jewish homeland, should be created in the Middle East. And this homeland would be given back to the Israelis, back to the Jews, because it was time for them to take back their historic, their ancient homeland, even though it had been governed by Muslims for almost 2,000 years. For basically 1,800 years, there had not been a Jewish nation state in the Middle East. And so that created some disappointment and some animosity there. Well, going along with this Zionist movement was not only was it a movement among Jewish people, but in 1917 a letter called the Balfour Declaration was issued from Britain. And the Balfour Declaration essentially said this, was that the Allies, or I'm sorry, rather Britain, supported the idea of a Jewish nation state in the Middle East. The idea that it was right and good that Jewish people could be given back their homeland. Now, we're going to read the Balfour Declaration in class, and it didn't exactly say that we're just going to take land from Muslims and give it to you. But it was the notion, or it was the concept, that we're going to protect and we're going to honor this, and we're going to give Jewish people a homeland in the Middle East for the first time in years. Well, in the 1930s, many Jewish people began moving back to Palestine. And the reason for that was because the climate of Europe had become so anti-Semitic, so hostile to Jewish people, that many said, hey, we're going to move back. We're going to go back to the homeland, to the land that was given to us by God, and we're going to set up camp, and we're going to live there. Now, they were still living under British rule. They were still living with majority Muslim. They did not have the land to control yet, but they were moving back there. Well, added to that in the 1930s and 1940s was the Holocaust. The Holocaust had a pretty big impact on it. And it wasn't so much a problem with mandate, but the Holocaust really made Europeans and British in particular and Americans take a look at the Middle East and say, I think we might want to make life for Jewish people better because they have faced centuries of anti-Semitism and centuries of hatred in Europe. So perhaps it is a better idea to give them their own land back in the Middle East, and perhaps it is a better idea to let them return to their historic homeland as was promised by God. Okay, so we're going to watch a video now. What I want you guys to do, even if you're not home or you're at home watching these videos, is I want you to get a couple of these terms and I want you to look them up and figure out what they are. The first one is the PLO, or the Palestinian Liberation Organization. Find out what they're all about. Okay. Yasser Arafat is the leader of the PLO, and look her up and find out what role he plays. There's a group called Hamas. It's an Islamic political party and is currently the majority in the Palestinian National Authority, and they actually govern part of what's called the Gaza Strip, which is a little area of land right there. There's something called the Intifada, which is an uprising. It was an area or a time period of protests against the Israelis and their rule in what's called the West Bank, which is the west bank of the Jordan River right there, and the Gaza Strip. It was a particular time period of Palestinian revolts against their rule. So we're going to watch the video in class. You're going to read about it in the textbook. So I hope everybody has a great day.